Do you realize consciousness is affected? There is this thing on. There is this thing going on. Do you realize our consciousness is affected? There is this thing going on. What is called
the news, brought to you live.
My name is Carla Green, and I will be your host tonight with Davin behind the boards. Welcome to Off the Hour. Today is the first day of March, and the time is 5 o'clock. Tonight on Off the Hour, we bring you a special hour-long panel on the mining industry in Quebec and abroad. 3 weeks ago, while some protesters were marching outside the Palais des congrés, and others were being piled into buses by the SPVM, Robin Dianou and I went inside the Palais to the Salon des ressources naturelles to talk to some of the mining representatives who were presenting and get their take on the industry from the inside. This evening, we'll be sharing 4 interviews we did with representatives from companies tabling at the Salon, as well as with one young environmentalist who went to the Salon to find a job, and a recording of one of the Salon's conference presenters on job opportunities in northern Quebec. First, we'll let them introduce themselves.
Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue. Je suis ravie d'être ici cet après-midi et je suis contente de vous voir ici intéressés au secteur minier. Évidemment, vous êtes au Salon des ressources naturelles. Les mines font partie de ce secteur d'activité. Je voulais aussi remercier la Chambre de commerce de Montréal Métro de nous avoir invités pour venir vous parler de ce secteur d'activité.
Détruire nos forêts, engager notre territoire.
First of all, could you introduce yourself, please?
Okay, so my name is Eric Marceau, and I'm a geologist for Canadian Royalties for the project Nunavik Nickel.
Je suis venue ici pour aller voir ce qui se passait au niveau de l'environnement, justement, qu'est-ce qui arrivait avec le plan Nord et tout ça. Donc, je suis venue faire tâter le terrain, comme on dit. Et après, je verrai bien si je continue au niveau de la maîtrise ou si j'accepte un poste pour aller voir vraiment dans le concret ce qui se passe avant de critiquer quoi que ce soit. Je pense qu'il n'y a rien de mieux d'aller voir pour vrai et après, on a une meilleure idée de oui ou non.
Pas de décision finale aujourd'hui, quoi.
Non, c'est ça. Ouais. Une ouverture d'esprit.
I'm Helen Thibault, Director of Communications for Osisco.
And what is Osisco?
Osisco is a young Quebecois company. It started in 1998, and Osisco now has its first mine, the Canadian Malartic mine, in the town of Malartic in Quebec.
Oui, mon nom est Frédéric Soucy. Je suis président de la compagnie Adolore Soucy à Rivière-du-Loup, une entreprise familiale qui a été fondée en 1931. Et on évolue au niveau des minières dans le nord du Québec.
My name is Philip. I work for a manufacturer of prepackaged materials. That's concrete, grout, and mortar.
To discuss and analyze the interviews and footage from the Salon, we're joined live in studio by 3 guests. Cleve Higgins, a member of the Anti-Colonial Solidarity Collective, who was involved in organizing the demonstration on February 8th against the Salon des ressources naturelles. In addition to organizing against the Plan Nord, he's been involved in research and solidarity work with communities affected by the Canadian mining industry in Quebec and in Latin America. We're also joined by Pakesso Mukash, a Cree activist and a member of Ceremony, that's with an a Juno Award-winning Cree group. And our final panelist is Marie-Dominique Langlois, coordinator of the Projet Accompagnement Québec-Guatemala, an organization that works to promote Quebecois solidarity with Guatemalans who fight for the respect of human rights in their country. We'll hear clips from the interviews and then ask our panelists to comment. Our discussion will span the breadth of the controversy around the mining industry, from sustainability to land rights. The video interviews are going to be screened live here in studio for our panelists, and we'll be filming the panel. So if you want to see more, you can go to montreal.mediacoop.ca to see the video versions of the interviews as well as the panel itself once we get it uploaded early next week. You're listening to a special edition of CKUT's Off the Hour on 90.3 FM, taking a look at the mining industry from within.
Je suis convaincue que vous n'avez pas idée de tout ce qui sert aujourd'hui, que si on n'avait pas les mines, ça vous les auriez pas. Sans les mines, on n'aurait pas les produits qu'on considère aujourd'hui essentiels, on ne pourrait pas s'en passer. Est-ce que vous envisageriez votre vie sans votre tablette, votre téléphone cellulaire intelligent ou whatever, l'équipement électronique sans votre TV? Si vous n'aviez pas les mines aujourd'hui, vous n'auriez rien de ça. Parce que ça prend des minéraux qui sont extraits du sol pour le faire.
Mais en fait, qu'est-ce qu'on peut vraiment faire dans le concret pour essayer de réajuster le tout, là? Parce que c'est sûr que du jour au lendemain, on se dit « OK, on ne pollue plus, on va plus dans le nord. On enlève toute l'électricité, on enlève les structures, les égouts, on enlève... » Enfin, je suis pas sûre que les gens vont être contents, là. On va avoir une nouvelle manifestation d'un nouveau truc. Enfin, à un moment donné, il faut arriver à trouver le juste milieu, la part des choses.
So I guess the first question is, it seems like the people at the Salon are kind of arguing that that mines are necessary to support life as we know it. And I was wondering, do you think that that's true? Whoever wants to start can start.
Okay, so I'll break the ice. I hope that I'll be supported by colleagues around the table. Well, I think yes. I think it's a discourse that we hear many times. I think every time that we speak about we hear about the mining industry, it's always about how we need mining resources. But we have to remind ourselves that much of the products, the minerals that are being extracted are for speculation, especially gold, which has been like one of the value resource. Now that the currency have international currencies have lost much of their value around the world, gold is and I won't get into details because I'm not a specialist on this side, but much is being speculated on the gold, and it's getting now the value of gold is getting close to $2,000 an ounce. I think it has sextupled since 2005 or beginning of the years 2000. So, and I know that we don't need that much gold.
And even, I guess the question is, for the things that you can argue that we do need to continue living the way we live, like, for example, I mean, oil is kind of like a really obvious example. I guess the question is, can we justify continuing to live the way that we live? Like, is that way of life justifiable for the after effects of the mine? Maybe Pakesso or Cleve, if you want to answer that.
It's an interesting question, being Native American or Cree. You know, like my people have been in the Hudson Bay area, James Bay area for thousands of years, and there's a way of life that we're trying to convince the people that is better, which may be the modern one. And like she was saying with the gold, that's an issue of the economies. If the economies crash in the world, everything will always be counted against gold. So if you have gold, you'll be all right no matter what the situation may be economically. But in terms of justifying the way of life, I think what they're doing is just like the oil companies. You need your car. But who developed the technologies? Why did the technology stop in terms of, the hybrid? Why did that take so long to come out? And the documentary, Who Killed the Electric Car, I thought was very interesting, where there's technologies that are being stalled, where I think mankind could be much further in their balance with our environment and our actual needs than we are. So from what I'm hearing there, from what we had with the Hudson Bay Company in terms of the Cree, we developed that dependency maybe 50, 60 years ago, where the Hudson Bay manager came and made us kill everything for, a couple of blankets. And for the hunters, and this isn't in the Canadian history books, but for a Cree hunter or any Aboriginal hunter that dealt with the Hudson Bay Company, you had to kill enough beaver pelts to stack to the height of a gun that you needed, whether it was a musket or whatnot. But when the hunter went back on the land, the store manager would push down and put more weight on the pelt. So every time he came back, he lost a couple of inches of hides, and families died. So they were telling them, you need us for the stuff we give you, and then our people killed everything. And then the elders speak about the Great Starvation as if it was like kind of a plague or something that happened to our people, but we did it to ourselves. And from what I'm seeing in that video is they're convincing us that there is a dependency. And I almost seem like a hypocrite, then since there's video, I have the Galaxy Note 2. Can I imagine myself living without it? Maybe. I'm not going to die if I don't have my phone. If I'm out on the land, it's not like I'm going to find geese by Googling them, or a bear,
But do you think it's something where it's as black and white as we either we stop mining and we cut the electricity, like what the woman that we interviewed said, or we just continue mining the way that we've been doing, or what do you think the solution is, Cleve?
I think that challenging the mining industry as it operates now in Canada and elsewhere in the world it means that, like, the reason that it's necessary, they talk about the personal products that people use because that's a way they try to get people to relate to it and kind of identify with what they're saying. But I think if they were to be more honest about the full economic argument, it's that the economic system we have depends on constant expansion, consumerism, and constant buying of more and more things. And mining is just providing the raw materials for that. Especially like the mining that isn't the really obviously speculative, like, or luxury based, like diamond and gold, but other things like iron, which is really big, and nickel. Those things mean a whole different way of organizing the global economy where there isn't this constant need for new things to be extracted.
Right. Okay, let's go to the next clip, which is about whether or not we actually can change the mines with technology to make them more quote unquote green.
Seeing my background is in engineering, I guess I put a lot of hope into technology to solve problems in general.
Everybody's making an effort to be sustainable, and the mining industry is doing its part.
What do you think the things are that should be improved?
Giving information so that people can understand what is the mining industry today. And keep innovating on different aspects, especially in the environment. I'm sure there are many things that we can improve in the environment. So just keep innovating like any other industry is doing right now.
Pour les effets négatifs, je pense qu'avec les normes environnementales qui sont présentes, les mines, c'est pas compliqué. Une entreprise comme ArcelorMittal, ils ont des gens d'Environnement Canada qui sont là permanents à tous les jours, pour s'assurer que le tout est fait selon les règles de l'art pour ne pas nuire le moins possible à l'environnement. Je crois que c'est quand même... Il n'y a pas tellement de faits négatifs, en tout cas pas pour ce que je connais de mon côté, là.
Forcément, l'être humain, on détruit autour de nous. Alors comment essayer de pallier justement en construisant des édifices beaucoup plus verts, mettre des toits verts. Enfin, je pense qu'il y a sûrement moyen de pallier avec tout ça, pas juste la problématique du Grand Nord, on la voit partout, cette problématique. On pollue partout, dans les eaux, les bateaux, donc il y a sûrement moyen de... Sinon, ça serait de retourner aux temps anciens, là, on arrête d'utiliser nos ressources et voilà.
So do you have any kind of like immediate responses to that, any of the three of you?
Well, I'd like, tell the native people again that the way they're living their life in balance with the environment is, like she was saying, we destroy everything around us. I mean, I found that very narrow-minded, in the way that we have to destroy, we have to consume and go where else, and I'm finding the whole thing interesting in that aspect, because can we go back? Do we change? I think, and what she's saying, the first thing one of the ladies that was interviewed was when you asked, what can technology do? We can inform the people more. That's not a technology. That's not something that changes anything in the mining industry. All you're saying is that you can either filter or push out information faster, or maybe deal with, some spin doctoring on some issues that might have happened quicker. And I didn't see anything where it says, we do have ways of extracting more for less and so on, or being made safer to the environment. None of them really seem to touch up on that, except that they weren't aware. And I mean, come on, we're, as being Cree people now, there have been mines and there's whole rivers that have been totally destroyed because of mining, and they haven't come to clean up, regardless of the agreements that we have signed with Quebec, the James Bay and the Palais recently. And, who's assuming responsibility for that? That's the best part of it for me. It's just, nothing can change. We got to go forward.
Do you think that there is a way to kind of mine in a better way, in a way that would be less destructive to the environment? I don't know if Marie-Do, if you have
well, now that like what they call the new technology now is not like underground mining, but it's not underground mining like we saw in Germinal novel or movie from. Anyway, this French guy that I don't remember his name, and but now what they do is that they dig hole of 2 kilometers, and they use lixiviation as the technology, which is to use cyanide or mercury and to extract the mineral from the ore from the rock. So. Anyway, I guess I think this large-scale mining exploitation is not good for the environment, and that, I'm a human rights activist. I'm not an engineer, but I would advocate for smaller exploitation than like large-scale project, and that's also what some groups in Latin America do too. Is for example, to organize artisanal miners in Colombia, and there are also issues like with transnationals who do like bring their profits home. They don't leave them like in Latin America or Africa, for example. And also, I just wanted to add something that on the first video and also on the second that made me think about this. There is also like this dilemma. Either we exploit, we consume, we produce a lot, or we stay like at the Neanderthal age.
In the Middle Ages,
yeah,
right?
Or Middle Age, yeah.
Right.
Whatever, but very far back in the time. I don't think the dilemma is there. It's not about exploiting to death or like being live in the age of dinosaurs. It's about consuming right. Like the right way, and I think there's more and more the discourse of degrowth that is coming up in the discourse of anti-mining movements, and it's about like also like finding ways of recycling. We don't need to get like all these new products. Not this. These new like minerals, and we already have them, and they are running in the like in the suburbs in some places. So
right, we don't need to be mining as much as we are. Yeah. Cleve, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, just about the environmental discourse and the sustainability discourse surrounding mining, that the mining industry, every company spends millions and millions of dollars, as they said, hiring. They have people hired on there to be their permanent staff, and that woman wanted to become one of those people. And the thing about those positions is it's 100% greenwashing, the term where people just say where something is done in a way that looks environmental in order to cover up and make less controversy surrounding something that's clearly a problem. And that's what it is. Every mine has these hundreds and even thousands of page environmental assessments that are done, and every single one, 100% of the time, comes down saying, and therefore the mine will be okay and should go ahead. Like, it's just, there's never any exceptions to that. So I think I never take seriously anything about environmental issues coming from somebody who's paid by a mining company to talk about those things. And regarding whether there could be a good mine, for me it's kind of an abstract question, and for me the thing that's more concrete are the questions of power surrounding mines and how they happen. And if there was a situation where there was a mining company and the way they operated was when people in a place said, hey, we have this resource that's here, we think, we want you to come explore it, and then if there's a mine, maybe we'll decide to go ahead and do it, and the people who are based in that land say that's what they want to happen, and they're kind of involved in the process all the way along, and the ones initiating it, then maybe I'd say, all right, that's not a mine I'm gonna like have a problem with. But that's never the case. It's always the mine coming in, manipulating things, using money to push things their way, and despite all the problems that come up with the people who actually are in that place.
Right, there's a very clear power differential.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to go to the next clip.
On parle de 45 mines en exploitation en 2021, mais au niveau du nombre d'emplois, on parle d'augmenter 18 570 emplois. C'est près de 70% d'augmentation. Et puis, il va aussi y avoir les départs à la retraite. Je ne peux pas vous dire combien il va en partir l'année prochaine ni l'année d'après, mais on estime que sur 5 ans, il y a 30% de la main-d'œuvre du secteur minier qui va avoir pris sa retraite.
Les mines, ça fait travailler des gens à tous les niveaux. C'est tous les corps d'un métier qui sont sollicités au niveau des mines, que ce soit des concierges, que ce soit les cuisiniers, que ce soit les gens de métier, que ce soit au niveau de l'administration. Ça fait évoluer tout ce monde-là à différents niveaux. Puis sans les mines, je pense que le Québec, on serait en pleine récession. Quand je regarde l'économie que ça génère, moi, personnellement, je trouve que ça serait néfaste pour des milliers de familles québécoises qu'il y aurait un ralentissement au niveau des minières. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, c'est des milliers de familles que ça fait vivre puis que ça fait évoluer dans la société. Qui fait en sorte que ces familles-là travaillent, gagnent de l'argent, gagnent des sous, à envoyer la génération future à l'université puis à s'assurer que la roue tourne.
Alors il faut un peu faire un compromis entre les enjeux environnementaux et durables avec les enjeux de l'économie.
Oui, exactement. Je pense que c'est de faire un compromis, exactement. Ouais.
Well, when I speak about the Canadian Malartic mine, I mean we're taking care of the environment. We're making sure that there is a minimum of impact. But you have to take the balance of all that. There is the environment, there is the economy, there is a social aspect. What we're doing in Malartic, say if there were no more mines in Malartic, I mean, this town wouldn't be as alive as it is today. So when we talk about sustainability, it's not only the environment, but you have to look at the economic impact and the social impact. So when you take those three, environment, social, and the economy, we have to find the right balance of those three. But of course, the environment is major and we want to reduce our impact. But whatever industry you have, there will always be an impact, okay? You just have to minimize it.
So I guess the question here is that there's a really common and widely used argument that it would actually be a negative thing to stop mining the way that we are today because it has these positive economic impacts and especially that it creates jobs. And this is a question for any of the three of you. First of all, do you think that that's true? And second of all, do you think that that's a good enough reason to kind of like block any kind of reform?
I think it is true depending on the way you think about the modern way of living. It just seems to be completely dependent on your finances and what your economic worth is in terms of a community. And it's just what happens if the economy crashes? What are they going to do? Where are they going to run to? Like, Montreal had the ice storm, what was it, the 90s, I believe? And my friend was here and he's Cree. And he hosts a radio show. I was up north and he called me and he was crying. He goes, "Pac, you wouldn't believe it. It's like the movie Armageddon. Everybody's trying to get out. Electricity cut for I don't know how many days or weeks that happened." And he was crying on the phone. And I said, "Roderick," I said, "You're Cree. Go kill a squirrel or a pigeon and pluck it the way you know how and just don't worry about it, But the way he described it to me, and I was up north. I was safe and sound back home where my river still flows and so on. But I couldn't imagine the carnage of a whole society, a whole city that did not know what to do without electricity. And I think that's where it gets dangerous, where there's this what they're doing is convincing you that you absolutely need money. And yes, it's true to the extent if you want to live with, the new the iPad or the iPhone and whatnot. And nobody's talking about that. And a lot of people now know that we're pretty much on the brink of that. I translated actually for Stratico up in Mistissini when they were trying to get the uranium thing to go through, and you had the COMEX there, and I think the Nuclear Commission. There was a commission that has to do a presentation to them. They say Stratico is going to abide by our guidelines, therefore they should be approved. And the community of Mistissini protested, and 300 people showed up and said, "We don't want this. Get the hell off our land." And it had zero impact on the end of COMEX, and if not the provincial government. And what was interesting about that is the Cree people still live off the land. And our government and our own Grand Chief and our lawyers will have people believe that's not the case. You can't live off the land anymore, maybe to an extent. But you can't live off the land anymore because of the state it is now in. And basically there was a cool legend that there's a snake that sleeps beneath the Odish Mountains. And they said that the legend says that if that snake is ever to be disturbed, the crap will hit the fan. And that the natives are saying that ore you're going for, it's this massive vein, world-class vein underneath the Odish Mountains. That's that snake. And they're saying, go ahead and poke it and see what happens. And the Cree people Stratico was right in saying we have all the technologies to keep it safe. But one earthquake that fractures the tunnel of 2 kilometers, and if things go wrong, the worst part of it is nobody gets the responsibility. You can't.
Right. And I guess it's also just this question of privileging immediate kind of like jobs and economic benefits over, both immediate and also long-term environmental impacts. Did either of you have anything?
I'm just going to add to that. The danger about that, too, is what they're doing is they're paying, the guy says, the janitors. When the EM1 project opened up, the hydro project in the Cree territory, they were paying dishwashers and janitors $5,000 a month. to go scoop up some dishes and so on, and you actually still needed a high school diploma degree to get in, and some of our people couldn't get in. It was frustrating, but what ended up happening is that if I go to EM1 and I'm washing dishes for $5,000 a month, am I going to go back to the school cafeteria and do the same for $10 an hour? So what they're doing is they're enabling people to get used to this massive money, and then it dries up. And that's why these small communities, you look at Chibougamau and these places that I know because I'm from the north area, people have moved away because there's nothing left. And all they know is it's almost like they know how to make these bursts of cash and then don't know how to handle just flatlining for a bit, you know?
Right, exactly. The boom and the bust
that's
cycle
it.
of the towns. Yeah.
It's a jackpot.
Yeah. Did either of you have anything to add?
Just a quick comment. Well, they talked about like many jobs, and for example, I know in Marie-Dominique and in like in ressources places like Côte-Nord also, and whenever there's a new project. Or a new company that is opening a project, you have a lot of people from the outside with high wages, and it creates inflation. But okay, maybe, and so that the people who don't have jobs or who live on insurance employment or pensions, and well, that they have regular like entries, they are the one who suffer, and we never talk about them. The rents get higher, the cost of food and services, everything, and sometimes they have to move away because they just can't leave
from their own home.
Yeah. And when you think about elders and stuff, it's hard for them too. So it's not good for everybody. So,
yeah, Cleve, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just the context of jobs. I mean, capitalism, where people, for the most part, depend on having work in order to survive, and then in places that were settled for mining in the first place, like Marie-Dominique, like that, those places exist on this boom-bust sort of economy, and so their existence for generations has depended on this extraction, and I think that's great for the government and for corporations. If they can create a situation where people really depend on having these jobs, and they can just, anytime something controversial wants to be done, they just say, well, but if it doesn't happen, there won't be jobs. It's just kind of this like hammer to like hit over people's head anytime there's opposition to something. And it goes along with austerity and these general, like the government cutting back on services and cutting back on meeting people's needs goes along with saying, okay, but we have the Plan Nord, so you can move up north and get this nice job, and then you'll have some money. So it's the general direction of the society. It's the same thing that people were talking about with the student strike. Like, do we want this to be something people have to pay for and go get a job up north in order to pay off the debt?
Right.
Or do we want this to be something that people have as part of their existence in the society as human beings?
Yeah, that's always the question. Okay, so we're going to go to the next clip.
Before mining, before digging for the gold, we had to relocate 205 houses and 5 institutions like primary schools that we had to relocate to another part of town.
What was the reaction?
What we do at OSISCO is dialogue all the time with the residents of Malartic. We're not the first mine to establish ourselves in Malartic. There were 4 mines before us. So the people in Malartic, they knew that there was probably still gold left, and probably a part of the town, if we wanted to go open pit, that had to be relocated. So of course they were preoccupied by the relocation, but we worked with them, and I think that was the success of that story. It's because we work with the town council, we work with the residents to be relocated, and it was an action plan for the relocation that we all did together.
Right. So, I mean, I think that in terms of this, it's just the question is, do locals really actually have the power to say no? And if they do you think that in general they tend to want to say no to mining companies?
I think it depends on the locals.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say the same thing.
You know, I mean, if it's a mining company already established and somewhere comfortable, you know, they might move knowing that there is a benefit to it. But then you look at native people, and we have to move. There's no, you know, it's, I mean, the difference too being Cree is that we don't have reserves. We're in communities. We're where basically we've always been for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And I think it's, I find it interesting in the way that, when the Crees oppose something in the Gazette or whatever, you'll have a couple of paragraphs. The Crees are now getting the Grand Council on it and the lawyers, and there's going to be negotiations, whatever. And I remember one time I was in the Metro, and for whatever reason, I was on my way to work, and I looked down, and there's like this 2-page spread. It was a Gazette thing, and it was like almost about a page and a half, and it was a small community up north, a non-native community, where they basically built this little town just to get away and keep it green for their kids. Just a lovely neighborhood, the picket fence, almost all of that, and then there was gold underneath it.
Oh no!
So the funny thing is, the mining company came in. The Gazette gave that. I'm saying this in the aspect of native people and non-native, so locals and Aboriginal locals, which is redundant. Yeah. But basically, when Cree people or native people, it's like, oh, those Mohawks, oh, the Cree, there they go again, But when it was this non-native community, I think of 500 or a couple of hundred, if not a few thousand, they're like, well, we don't like it because this was supposed to be, they get a 2-page spread and the whole story about their kids and their education and what are we going to do? What if they come and get the gold? And I was in the Metro and the page was open right in front of me and I read it and I went, wow, really? A 2-page spread on this? So I think it's, they're always going to have to deal with the locals. Like I said, I think it depends on the locals and what they're aware of.
Yeah. Actually, the next clips that we had were about, in terms of respecting the rights of Aboriginal people. So why don't we go to those clips and then we can keep talking about locals in general.
The closest indigenous community is about an hour and a half from Malartic. We've met them. We work with them. We're not on an area recognized by the government of Quebec that it is an Algonquin territory, but we have met them and we work with them. Right now we have 23 indigenous people working with us in Malartic. So we work with the communities in sense, can we train them? Can we offer them jobs? The Algonquins, they claim it is their territory, but the government of Quebec hasn't recognized that it was their territory. So
as a company, do you choose which interpretation or somehow?
We choose the legal one, which is the one from the government. But when the Algonquin told us, like, you are on our territory, we check with the government and they are not recognized like the Cree nations are recognized in James Bay. They don't have that recognition by the government of Quebec. So we told the Algonquins to say that part, the legal aspect of your territory or not your territory, that has to be dealt with the government of Quebec, not Osisco.
The project is really far from where those people is living. So there's not really any impact. They don't see any smoke from where they live. There's not.
C'est sûr qu'ils sont pas contents, c'est dans leur territoire, mais en même temps, c'est un peuple. C'est dans leur territoire, mais en même temps, ils ont une qualité de vie un peu. Je sais pas comment dire, mais enfin, ils sont pas si bien choyés que ça. J'ai vu un reportage dernièrement d'ailleurs là-dessus. Je pense qu'il y a beaucoup de travail à faire avec eux justement pour qu'ils soient confortables et bien dans cet univers. Et quand on parle d'environnement, c'est justement d'essayer de replacer la nature comme elle est. C'est sûr qu'on peut, on fait une mine, on fait des choses, il y a une certaine limite de territoire qui est touchée, mais tout ce qui est autour, il y a sûrement moyen d'arranger ça pour le mieux et pour tout le monde. Parce que sinon, autrement dit, on va couper l'électricité à tout le monde et voilà, on va se plaindre. Enfin, à un moment donné, il faut arriver à avoir le juste milieu avec notre consommation et le travail qu'il faut faire tout en essayant de les garder parce qu'on les aime bien, les Autochtones, en tout cas je les aime bien et j'aimerais bien avoir justement un compromis et c'est pour ça que ça m'intéresse en même temps d'aller dans le Nord pour aller voir ce qui se passe réellement, quoi.
Something that really interested me in what she said is that this idea that like they're not like Native peoples aren't living that well, and there's this idea of like what it means to live well, and that maybe even like going in and with mining is going to like help these communities. So I was wondering if you guys have anything to say about that.
It's not this is what I love about like in terms of her point of view is it's the view of this modern world of like, well, they're kind of poor. They're kind of disgusting, and therefore they look at us that way, and yet the way we're living now is actually unnatural because we're consuming, but yet the native people who have been here forever, and the way their life, the way life was, they're the ones that are kind of like, well, they're not doing that good, But the thing is, I'll tell you one thing, is that when the Paix des Braves was signed, and in terms of the Cree people, is a lot of money. 3.5 billion was going to be allotted to us over 50 years, and a lot of people were like, that's a lot of money for just 16,000 Crees. It's less than welfare. That's a fact. But what happened was that all the people that went to work for this better way of life, people have big F-150 trucks now. Their houses are a little bit bigger. They eat a little more, that's for sure. Diabetes went up to 20% of our population. And the one thing that went up by a ridiculous amount was the consumption of cocaine. So is that really helping Native people? You know, like there's more alcohol consumption. People have more money. They don't handle money the way we handled ourselves traditionally. And that's what I'm finding interesting, is that I was part of a documentary that they came up and shot when we were goose hunting. And my friend, who was the journalist, eventually sits down with me. I'm at my blind with my dad, and she goes, I'm just going to ask you. She says, Pakesso, is this Quebec? We're on the 55th parallel. I said, do you see a McDonald's or a Tim Hortons? No, this isn't Quebec. I said, this is John Rupert's land. He knows where the river runs behind that ridge. There is no Quebecer that knows what is beyond that mountain right there, what is in those trees and what is under that water. I said, that's where the problem is. People are assuming it's this big blanket, you know, and I think that's what's funny, is that they're like, well, the Algonquins, they say it's their land. The Algonquins could probably tell you where every bear den is, where the beavers are, where the caribou walk, and so on. No Quebecer's going to be able to tell you that in terms of a general Quebec. So I found that interesting. It's like, we're going to go with the province. We're not going to, you know, work with those Native people. They don't even know if it's their land or not.
Right. Cleve, Marie-Do?
I just, what comes to mind for me in hearing them talk about the situation in that way, in terms of Indigenous land and the legal definition, as kind of a mining company just showing up, responding to the situation as the mining's been what created that situation in the first place. Like, it's the creation of Quebec as a territory expanding north so that they can extract resources, lumber as well, lumber and mining, that they call it Quebec, and that they take Indigenous people off their territories and put them on reserves and do all these things in order to intentionally create a separation from the land, so that they arrive at, say, oh yeah, but they live way over there, so that's not really an issue for us. And the Quebec government says this isn't their territory, so it's not a problem. So it's the creation of a situation historically where Quebec and those that work with Quebec call the shots on what they want to do. And it just, I mean, my understanding of how land works with Indigenous people is, according to the government, reserves are where Indigenous people can actually live legally, but that's actually owned by the federal government. And then the territories are where they can sometimes hunt or have some rights, depending on agreements, but those are actually owned by the Quebec government, by the provincial government. And so there's, according to the government, there's no Indigenous land,
right,
when in fact it's all Indigenous land.
Right. And then also something I wanted to ask is about the Canada very late but recently signed the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and it puts an emphasis on the fact that there be fair, prior, and informed consent for that Indigenous peoples have the right to this form of consent. And so I was wondering if you thought that the way if Indigenous peoples have more power or more capacity to kind of like say no to mining companies, or less, or if it's more or less the same as any local town or any local community.
The people might have power, but the people are led by residential school products. And that's what we have right now in the Cree Nation. Everybody, like, I've been to panels where they say that the Crees are very proud of the Plan Nord and their association with it and their involvement, or La Paix des Braves. But these things were negotiated by and signed by people that just came out of the residential school system. They've been erased. Everything's been violated within them to deform and destroy everything that they've ever been that would have been Cree. So what we have right now in Quebec is they have this perfect generation, and Canada does too, is where they have the people that they went and assimilated are now all in leaderships. And 3 out of the 4 Grand Chiefs that the Cree people have had in the James Bay have been residential school products, and 3 of those Grand Chiefs signed agreements with the provincial and federal governments. My dad was the other Grand Chief, and he'd never been. And my dad never signed an agreement that's signed over a river or anything else, which is interesting because he was the one who grew up like on the land like the others, but did not go to residential school. So the timing, it's okay that Canada says, you know, yeah, we recognize Indigenous peoples, but the peoples are being represented and led by the assimilated that Canada themselves, you know, assimilated. So I think it would be great if that was true. I think if the people were able to be aware of it and exercise it, but the timing is interesting.
Right. Marie-Do, did you have anything to add?
Well, maybe just to underline also that indigenous people are even, I feel, more stuck between the dilemma, like between modernity and tradition, or, well, that's more how we put it, the white people, but then what it's kind of the same dilemma that has been presented at the beginning, like the modernity or dinosaurs or ancient times, but I visited, and I, like over the years, I visited indigenous communities, and also with the indigenous representative from Latin America, and some of the testimonies sometimes was that, especially from, for example, in a delegate, a Shuar from the Amazon, Equatorian part of the Amazonie, that she said that it was sad to see how as if like the indigenous community had given up fighting for their rights, but residential schools was just like a terrible event. Well, part of, anyway, I don't want to speak too much, but and also, in Ecuador, they have many indigenous people, and they are very strong. They are a majority also, and they've been able to throw down various presidents. For example, the free and prior and informed consent is something that is in Guatemala has been like part of their struggle to defend their right to consent, the indigenous people, and it's also linked to their indigenous heritage, like the council to decide together collectively. So, but it's different context.
Yeah.
My understanding of the current legal situation with consent in Quebec and Ontario are the places I know a bit more than others, is that in Quebec there's the BAP process, which is supposed to assess environmental factors, but then there's also, in theory, a criteria of social acceptability, but that's usually ignored and not often taken into account. And even if it was taken into account, the BAP is not a binding process. It's just like hearing what people have to say, and then the government can go make its decision. So that is not consent at all. It's just a way of giving people something to participate in, to give them the feeling that they were involved in some way when really they don't have any power over what happens.
It's a technology.
Yeah, totally.
It's a new technology of information. Yeah.
And in Ontario, there's been specific court challenges regarding Indigenous opposition to land on their territories. KI, I think, was the community in particular that was challenging this. And the court ruling was specifically, no, communities don't have the right to say no to mining projects. That's not something they can do. So that's where things stand, despite how much these things are talked about by the government or people in the mining industry about consultation and all these things. At the end of the day, they don't actually ever want to give people who might have a problem with what they're doing the right to veto projects.
Right. Okay, so we're going to go to our next clip.
S'engager notre territoire. Je voulais juste vous dire que ça nous fait plaisir d'être la génération qui va prendre tout ça. Ça va être la génération qui va voir toute notre espèce se faire détruire à cause de votre avarice. C'est vraiment génial. D'ailleurs, attendez-vous à ce qu'il y ait des gens qui résistent. Ouais, je vais juste passer mon message. Il y a déjà des autochtones qui résistent un peu partout au Québec. Écoutez-les. Écoutez la sagesse des premiers peuples. Si vous voulez pas voir vos enfants se faire tuer par des ressources naturelles, par des arts naturels. Même oublier son texte. Recule. Disputer la nature, c'est toute la nature est moins importante que la cause de
Pourquoi pensez-vous qu'il y a autant de monde qui est vraiment contre ce développement dans le Nord? Et est-ce que vous pensez que c'est légitime?
Je pense que c'est la liberté d'expression en 2013. On a le droit d'avoir chacun de nos expressions puis de nos opinions. Puis c'est ce qui fait qu'on a une société qui évolue, parce que si 100% des Québécois diraient blanc, il n'y aurait pas de challenge, il y aurait pas, on s'en irait où? Fait que je pense qu'on a le droit à chacun d'avoir nos opinions.
Écoute, j'ai pas écouté la manifestation. J'ai rien contre les manifestations. Je pense que tout le monde a le droit de s'exprimer. Je pense que c'est le meilleur des mondes, c'est justement pour faire bouger des choses.
Well, I mean, we're in a democratic country, and it's important to exercise the rights of free speech as long as it's done in a respectful manner. I don't mind, as long as there's no violence or anything like that, obviously.
So as you can see from this video, or if you're listening over the radio, as you can hear, the difference between the scene outside and inside the Salon was really striking. Outside there were sirens wailing and there were cops with riot shields, and inside everything was quiet and brightly colored and clean. And it was in a room that was buried deep in the Palais des Congrès with no windows, and it was totally isolated from the outside. And the one protester who we saw who actually managed to get in was almost instantly escorted out by force. It was easy to feel like the protest hadn't really managed to penetrate into this world. And so I wanted to talk about whether you think that protests like the one outside the Salon are effective. And Cleve, I know that you were involved in organizing one of the protests, so maybe you want to talk first.
I think it was a much smaller... So the precedent for this, the context of this is happening in, is that this is the follow-up Salon to the Salon d'Emploi for the Plan Nord that happened in April 20th and 21st or 19th, around then. And that one was almost completely shut down. I think they're having this one in part because that one was basically canceled, and they were like, okay, we'll try to do it again just to save face, kind of. And that involved thousands of people protesting outside very disruptively and trying to get inside pretty effectively. In April, and so this time they tightened the security a lot. It was a lot harder to get in than it was the last time, and there were less people who showed up. There wasn't a student strike going on, and the context was different. But it still was, what happens is that by being outside of the Palais des Congrès and having a demo that's sticking around and going near it, they don't like opening the doors because they're worried people are going to rush in like they did in April. And so it just makes it, in the video you can see it's a pretty empty space also. There are very few people in there. It's not bustling. Definitely. So that's, and then also just the image that it creates, because the Plan Nord is specific projects, dams and mines and highways and railroads and things like that. But it's beyond those specific projects, which would probably continue even if there wasn't a Plan Nord. Plan Nord is a publicity event by the Quebec government. It's the government selling the North to investors around the world, to selling the idea to people in Quebec that exploiting the North is a good thing, that they'll get jobs there. It's this publicity, and big events like this in Montreal are a key piece of that. So having a sort of oppositional presence at every one of those events is in this publicity way disrupting this attempt they're making to promote the Plan Nord and making it look like a good thing.
Right.
Plan Nord is also ultimately a plan of occupation by the Quebec government. When they had the referendum, was it 95? The North was all no. Natives were like, no, we're going to stay with Quebec. So my dad, when we had these conversations, he said, what's happening now is they're promoting the North. Before, they didn't give a damn. It was just really skinny trees that they didn't think were worth logging. And then they came after our rivers, and doing so, they found some minerals and so on. So I'm like, well, now it's getting interesting. We got to get our people up there, because the next referendum that comes up, if one mine can draw 2,000 to 3,000 miners, and if eventually they've established themselves like Malartic or Val-d'Or and so on, wait till the next referendum and then see what the North is going to look like. And they're going as far as up as, I guess, Kuujjuaq and just the Nunavut territory. And it's occupation, because the thing that I'll try to make this brief, but we went to a youth leadership meeting about 10 years ago, and there was a lawyer talking to all these the 10 nations of Quebec, the Aboriginal youth. And my brother-in-law asked the lawyer, he says, is Quebec a nation? He was so uncomfortable. He actually looked around for about a good 20 seconds to see how many French-Canadian kids would be there or not. And then he says, technically, because they've been conquered by the English way back when, they're not a nation. And then I put up my hand, and he's like, do you know this guy? I was like, no, I don't know who he is. And I said, well, why are they signing nation-to-nation agreements with the Cree people and trying to with the 10 nations? And I said, is it possible that what Quebec is trying to do is ultimately still separate, take the Aboriginal people who have been here forever, have them, recognize them as a nation, if they got 7 out of 10 nations, the Innu, the Abenaki, the Mohawks, the Crees, and so on, to sign these agreements, they could take them all and go to the federal and say, look, the native people who have been here forever say we're a nation, give us our independence. And now what do they have is the occupation of the whole North. Now the native people can't get away. So the Plan Nord, because I remember, I think when Pauline got in, she was like, well, I don't know, I'm not too sure about the Plan Nord. And it's almost like somebody said, Pauline, you want to separate, right? Well, what do you think this is? And then things changed. You know what I mean? So now what they have is they have the waters, which you can't sell water as a free-flowing good. You can't. I can't sell you my river. Mine still flows. Like I couldn't sell it for any amount of money. You contain it, put it in a bottle, put it in a dam. Now that water's worth money. So there's a far bigger plan in the Plan Nord than just mining. Quebec wants its separation, whether the people know it or want it or not.
Right. And another question I wanted to ask is, do you think that protests, whether they're organized by indigenous groups or settler groups, do you think that they differ in any kind of significant way? Like, I know that there are lots of different actions, there are lots of different forms that actions take. Some will be protests or maybe roadblocks. And so I was wondering if you think that there's a difference in the way that the two groups approach protesting environmental destruction.
Well, I think when non-natives protest, they don't get rocks and stuff thrown at them as people try to go to work, like happened years ago, I think. You know, I think what's perfect right now is social media. Idle No More would not have happened without Twitter, and nor Facebook, and YouTube and whatnot, you know. And I think there is a difference, of course there is. But what's happening now is because of our social media, as people are seeing, we all think the same. And all of a sudden, it's not just natives and non-natives. It's like there's this movement of everybody's now going, well, those big open pit mines, man, they're not looking that good because somebody just posted a picture 5 seconds ago on Twitter. I don't like it. I don't like Stratico. I don't like the uranium and so on. And even if there is a difference, I think we're headed. And I think that this panel shows that we can all think alike and hopefully change things because now we're all in the same, I don't want to say boat, maybe canoe because I'm native, you know, in a big hydro reservoir.
Right. Okay, we're going to go to the last clip.
Somebody who will invest in a mining, in a mine, for sure, he wants to have a good payback. That's going to be his first thing. It's normal. He's human. He wants a good payback. But I would say that more and more, an investor, when he invests in a company, he will look for the sustainability of the company, what they're doing, how do they treat their people around. So the investors now will invest in what I call a good company, a good corporate citizen.
So at first, Canadian Royalties was an exploration project. It was a small exploration company, fully Canadian company. This company tried to launch the mining of the project itself by itself. So which means we will have now a mine running by a Canadian company. In 2008, we had the crash we know, economic crash. So it was no more possible for those people to go onward with the construction of the mine infrastructures. So they had to sell. And Jilinjian Nickel Industry, a company from China, bought this company, Canadian Royalties Project, with another Canadian company, Goldbrook Ventures, which is based in Vancouver. So now they went partners in Canadian Royalties.
So I think one of the things that's kind of most scary about the evolution of the mining industry is the way that it's become really globalized in terms of international investors. And we were just talking about the Plan Nord, and the Plan Nord is a perfect example of Quebec's kind of own like pet project in international investment in mining. What does this globalization mean? Especially, we can talk about like Canadian mining companies in Latin America, for example. Marie-Dominique, if you have something that you want to...
Well, in fact, I won't talk about that.
It's okay, you can talk about something else.
It rings me a bell that, there was this, a few years ago, the civil society got organized behind a bill at the parliament to start to, like a first step to control, kind of not control, but to make sure that the government support to mining companies operating overseas would not continue if these companies were found guilty of breaching international norms of environment and human rights. One of the the bill didn't pass, but the thing I want to say is that one of the arguments that was made by the industry and that is still being made against legislation in Canada is that, well, if we do that, if we try to control the industry here, all the companies, all the investment will go and then move in China. So China is always a big threat, or the United States, but it's the argument. But because of this, should we continue and mix the Canadian investment with blood and human rights violation? That's what I wanted to say.
Is that justification for continuing the mining industry, basically? Yeah.
Canada is sort of the center of mining in the world in terms of finance, and the majority of companies in the world that are registered as mining companies are registered in Canada and on the Toronto Stock Exchange. And so Canada has this specialization in mining, and that's based in the history of Canada as a British settler state. If you look at other places in the world that mining has been strong in and mining companies are based, it's South Africa, the United States, Australia. It's all of these places settled by the British Empire, and London was the first place where there was kind of mining industry and mining finance. So that's a legacy that Canada carries on and specializes in the world, and that's in Quebec as well. And it is something that the Canadian mining industry and the government are exporting to other places in the world. So the same things that are happening with Indigenous communities in Quebec or Ontario, or all the north in Canada in general, either with the tar sands or the pipelines or these various struggles that are happening, very similar struggles are happening against Canadian companies or companies that are registered on the Canadian exchange in pretty much every country in the world. Like, it's very, very widespread. And the Canadian government and the companies go to the governments of those countries and say, you need to rewrite your mining codes because we know how to do that, so that you can get these companies to come in and build mines there. So it's a very specific way of relating to land and people on land that is based in colonization, in a specific form of British colonization. And that's, I think, what is in common about these struggles, whether it's in Northern Quebec or Latin America.
Right. Pakesso, if you want to make it, we have about 45 seconds if you want to make a last comment.
I was invited to speak at something called the Plan Nord, Plan Sud Main Menace a couple of years ago here in Montreal. And what I found interesting is there was one panelist who spoke and discussed the top 10 places in the world where mining is most interesting or more, feasible in the easiest way. 7 out of 10 were Canadian provinces. Guess which province was number 1? Which was the Wild West. It's the gold rush all over again. Quebec.
All right. Well, I want to thank all three of you for joining me and for taking part in this panel and the discussion of the mining industry in general. And that does it for this edition of the Off the Hour and the panel discussion on mining, which is produced by Montreal's Community News Collective at CKUT. My name is Carla Green, and I've been your host tonight, with Robin Dianou filming behind the camera and Davin behind the boards.
But what will happen in the future? Because we don't know the needs for the next generations, well, it will be. We can say, well, in the next 20, 50 years, that's what, as a gold company, that's what we hope, that people will still need gold. But we don't know what's going to happen. We might find things on planet Mars. Who knows? Maybe there is gold on Mars and we'll go there and dig.
You'll be able to find the video of this hour-long panel discussion on montreal.mediacoop.ca by early next week, along with video clips of the interviews that we aired during tonight's show. I've been joined live in studio by Marie-Dominique Langlois from the Projet Accompagnement Québec-Guatemala, Cleve Higgins from the Anti-Colonial Solidarity Collective, and Pakesso Mukash, Cree activist and musician. Thank you three all again so much for joining us. Thank yous are also due to all those who make educational and inspirational radio here at CKUT possible. For more information on anything you heard tonight, or if you would like to participate or support news produced by and for the Montreal community, please contact CKUT's Community News Department at 514-448-4041, extension 6788, or news@ckut.ca. Also, you can follow us on Twitter at CKUT News.